Of course, our reporter Gillian Pillay was at the march earlier today. She joins us now via phone line. Very good evening to you, Gillian. It was said that today's march was called as a collective of communities voicing their concern. But today's turnout seemed to be quite the contrast. How well supported was today's blood march?
A very good evening to you, Shante. Yes, today's march was a culmination of a range of issues. The community had expected something like 12 communities from the Gauteng province to partake in the Blood Friday campaign. And they obviously expected quite a few numbers. They even bussed in residents from some of the areas. But looking at the numbers today and the call that they had made in the weeks leading up to this particular day, the numbers definitely fell short. But what they had said in their sentiments was that today was the start of a range of other campaigns following up to what they want to stand up against. They want provincial government to hear their demands, and that's what they did. They handed over a memorandum, and they really cited a range of demands, and it's things that we've heard in the wake of the Westbury violence and unrest that we saw ravaging that community. Something like 7 people dying in 2 weeks, in a 2-week space. So, you know, the numbers might not have added up today, but what they had said was they came together as representatives from various communities. The numbers did fall short. Everyone could see we expected quite a lot of people to turn out, because we know how the communities have taken to violence in the wake of what Westbury had was disgruntled about. But looking at the march today, they felt that they had achieved what they had set out to do, in the sense of taking their demands to provincial authorities, particularly the Premier, and engaging him on the way forward. They spoke about them going to a boot camp as representatives of so-called or predominantly colored communities. And there they want to really flesh out what they as communities have neglected. In one of those interviews that you heard in the piece that played before my interview, the guy he made certain concessions around them neglecting their own communities, where they were very passive and sat back and saw how these rogue elements had basically taken the community hostage, and they made certain concessions that they needed to blame themselves. But still a long road ahead, Shante, in getting a more collective from a journalist perspective, a more stronger voice from the communities to stand together to get everyone involved in addressing not just economic exclusivity, as they call it, but particularly what what we have seen play out in those communities where tactical teams are sent in. And that's what Police Minister Becky clearly did in the wake of what we saw in Westbury. But will it definitely quell the violence, and will the kingpins be rooted out? Those are the main questions. And how will we address the high levels of unemployment in those communities, where the future of a very young, bright, so-called colored youngster, be it girl or boy, is dimmed by these kinds of instances where they fall into a life of crime and gangsterism, Shante.
Yeah, Gillian, just speak about that interaction that the community had with the Gauteng provincial government this morning. Take us through how the memorandum of demands were received by the Gauteng Premier, and whether or not the community was actually responsive to his reaction.
When they had started off with the march, Shante, it was clear that they had a dialogue with the Premier before today's particular Blood Friday march. And it was an administrative exercise, more than showing the country and the province that they had finally come together, that they had gotten their communities to stand together to march to the legislature, and that the Premier it was very swift. There was no delays in him coming to receive their demands. They're not calling it a memorandum, they're calling it a demand. We have 7 days to respond. And they read out all their demands, and what really stood out for me was that they felt that they are forgotten people, that the children are forgotten, the children aren't being included in the provincial government, in job security, in the running of the country. As that upsound says there, Premier David Makhura, you told us once upon a time you were not white enough, and now you're telling us you're not black enough, and that is the sentiment among coloured people throughout the country that they are forgotten people. There's no face of a coloured person in structures of government. That is the things they brought up. That it is very difficult for youngsters who are promising within the community to get jobs with government.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to cut you due to time. Thank you very much, SABC reporter Julian Pillay for SABC News today. On today's march, the Blood March, predominantly coloured communities taking their memorandum of demands to the Gauteng Premier's office.